And thank you all so much for coming this morning. And wow, Harry. Harry's quite a charismatic speaker, isn't he? Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Wow, that was very, very exciting. I'm going to do my best to match that tempo. That was really wonderful. Thank you. Power and glory of the sun. Yes, it's a beautiful topic. My business name is Sun Star Astrology. And that came to me many years ago during meditation as I was deeply studying the sun and the incredible beauty of what it is in the deepest way I could. And that led me to what is understood as the solar logos. The solar logos is the understanding that the sun is not just an energy source, it's an intelligence. The sun is not simply a thing, it is a being. It is a cosmic being. In the universe, suns, stars are powerful points of light, and from a deep understanding that the universe is consciousness made manifest. The scientific model presents a story where first came matter and then came consciousness. The ancients know, and today the awakening that's occurring is reminding us that this is not the case. Consciousness precedes matter. That is such a fundamentally important statement to make. That, in a nutshell, is what can be described as the definition of holism. The holism means oneness, where there is no division, there is no separation. It's one grand universe, which also means one song. The one song, the one sound, the one thing. It's a very big concept to grasp, because even thinking about how far China is gets far. If we start thinking about how big the farthest planets are in the solar system, it's large. When we realize that the closest star to our planet, to our star, is 4.22 light years away, it would take us centuries to get there in a spaceship to the closest star. And then we live in a galaxy that's filled with stars, billions of stars, but that's only one galaxy, and there's billions of galaxies. So when you begin to appreciate the grandeur of the universe, which is filled with galaxies, let alone stars, galaxies like what in cosmological thinking is called a galactic lord. The entire galaxy is a form of consciousness. The universe is conscious. Each galaxy is conscious. Each sun is conscious. And then we, as a species, as human beings, live on this planet graced by that sun. It's a very beautiful understanding. Now, a little technical point is that every sun in the entire universe has a different molecular structure. It's a bit geeky, but what's really important in that understanding is that you realize that we are directly related to this sun, and it kind of jabs a little bit of a little poke at the notion of aliens, by the way. Aliens. Because you could not exist around another sun in this body. The sun's molecular energy field penetrates everything in the solar system. Okay, so the sun's energy field reaches out into the fullness of its energy, which is at the speed of light, one day traveling as fast as light can go. That's the sun's energy field. Pluto's about 1/3 that distance, by the way. Now, the sun's energy field, the radiation, purely physics, penetrates everything in the entire solar system. You and I certainly included. What that implies, among other things, is, once again, we could not exist around another sun. So it's Star Wars, and I love science fiction, by the way. Oh yes. It's fun to imagine, going in spaceships to other planets and stars, and I'm not going to say that's not entirely possible. I'm not. But not strictly in this body. And the whole notion of aliens, just to say this quickly, it's a bit of an aside, but they must be interdimensional beings. They must be coming from a different way of getting here than traveling through space. Again, I love the sci-fi, Star Trek, and Star Wars, but it may sound a little limiting, but there is no traveling through space in a spaceship the way we think we can at the great distances and speeds we think we could. Not unless we are in a different dimensional frequency, something else. Okay, so consider that for a moment. And now, coming back to it, the sun, that we look at the sun, we go, there's the sun in the sky, which is very beautiful, very true. We can sometimes be referring to it, as people do, as an object. There's this object in the sky. Well, you can turn your point of view around diametrically and say this. The sun is the nucleus of the solar system, and we are within that body. So in that respect, and this is an ancient knowing, we live in the sun. It's a very strange thing to think, but we live within the body of the sun, which extends one light day in every direction spherically, like one great big grand bubble in space. So we live in that body. Now, the sun's light is, again, when you think of the sun as a consciousness, not just an energy, you begin to realize this principle of wholeness better. You begin to realize, wow, we're really in this. Now, in our consciousness, in everyday thinking, well, there's here and there and us and them and you and I, and we have to deal with being in this body, so we're navigating through third-dimensional reality. So as we do that, we realize, well, we better keep our feet on the ground and not think so cosmologically, not get so carried away with this holistic thinking, which is really understandable. We need to navigate being here. We're driving cars, and we have to not bump into people and things, and so forth. So we keep it real in the physical, dimensional, third-dimensional sense. Very natural, very fine. But on occasion, especially like in meditations that Perry just gave, we can get into a different kind of consciousness. We can get into a more wholeness. We can get into our higher mind, which is actually our heart chakra consciousness. We can get into a deeper sense of letting go of what's actually our intellectual lower mind, which is our dividing, sorting, categorizing, differentiating, separating consciousness, which is really good. That consciousness makes you an individual, and me too. So we can celebrate that. However, that 5 perceptual perspective is transcended by our 6th. And the 6th is where we get into this oneness, communion, consciousness, this meditation state where we remember that as a human being having an ego body and personality, yes, we have those, but we are souls incarnate. We are souls incarnate. And that's the most beautiful understanding, and that's what Jesus was saying. That's what all the great teachers say. And they remind us, hey, this is a journey. You have a life path, but you in this body are temporary. Get used to it, but enjoy the journey. But remember, you're a soul. Now, that soul that comes into this game, this manifestation, this miracle, this world, okay, it comes in with a plan. It comes in with a destiny. It comes in with a purpose. And the way astrology works, which is nothing short of what I call the psychology of nature, the fact that we're on this planet, this moon goes around us, and apparently that sun goes around us, but it doesn't. We go around it. And thanks to modern science, we've learned that. We can appreciate that. But that is not your perceptual experience, is it? Your perceptual experience is the sun's going around us. the way that it rises, we don't talk about the earth turning, we talk about the sun rising and setting. But actually, it's the earth turning. So it's an optical illusion. So the earth is going around the sun, and that's, as it does, I was asked earlier, why does it appear planets go backwards? And it's because of that. The earth going around the sun catches up to the planets, and the far ones are slower, so it makes them appear like they go backwards periodically. All of that together produces a type of psychology. Psychology is a word that's useful for this because, after all, that word translated directly means the study of the soul, the psyche. The psyche, that word, the study of the soul is what psychology really means. So while we can celebrate personality distinctions, which is really valid, we don't want to dismiss the soul, but unfortunately, a lot of mainstream psychology has done that, but the revolution is on, isn't it? And the Metaphysical Center is a beautiful example of that revolution, saying, And that's what the awakening that's happening right now is all about, by the way. Because when you hear people, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up to what? Well, wake up to that you're a soul, first of all. Wake up to the illusion of materialism as a final conclusive reality. We are physical beings. We enjoy the physical world, but it's not a conclusion. That's all you have to remember for that. The other aspect of the awakening is that, well, there are some out there who have notions of superiority, and that may be anchored in that materialistic survival of the fittest mindset. The attitude is, well, if you're too dumb or too lazy or sleeping, then step aside. Unfortunately, that consciousness exists in this world. So that's the darker side of the story. But getting back to the sun, the beauty of the sun, now we all can talk about our sun sign. And Western astrology, by the way, is what's called tropical astrology. That means, in a nice, beautiful, simple translation, Western astrology can be described as the astrology of the sunlight. So where we naturally think of astrology, people will defer to the constellations, which is really valid. And there are these, we can look at along the plane of the ecliptic. The plane of the ecliptic means the apparent path of the sun. There's this belt of constellations, and there's lots of people say, well, there's 13 or 14 or 12. 12 is very tidy when you have a 360-degree circle. That's as simple as that. It's kind of tidy. You go, well, you divide that by 12, and you create these 30-degree segments. And sometimes people get confused with what all the degrees are about. A circle has 360 degrees, and each sign is 30, and there's where all the degrees come from, by the way, so to keep it really simple. Yeah, so sometimes the math, astrology seems very complicated. That's elementary. The elementary of astrology is the mechanics. The mastery of astrology is the interpretation of the soul in front of you. And there's a lot of layers to it. It's not that simple, but the basics of astrology are rather simple. You can learn it in one day. And I'd be happy to teach a course, and I want to put that out to you in one day. I can kind of download you on, okay, I get the basics. Good. Then your intuitions can go. You can start connecting the other dots. I also have created a lot of presentations, by the way, and I'd love to show them to you, which do a bit more of a larger dot connecting. So I'm big on context. If I can give you a big stretch of perspective and bring it down to a more immediate, you kind of see the bigger picture. That's what I'm doing right now. I want to give you this bit of a larger perspective. Now, coming back to the sun, the astrology, Western astrology is the astrology of the sunlight. What's so beautiful is that one of the things I do in my work is I sometimes correct people's birth time. 1 minute of time can make a big difference in your astrology. Now, it's important to note that due to the holistic nature of reality, which is measured by fractals, on the flip side, and Jason can tell you more about this, I can do your astrology without your birth time. You don't need, strictly speaking, the birth time. But if we have the birth time, it's very precise. you're that much closer. But there's different types of tools, numerological tools. The cards, the destiny cards can give you very precise incremental measurements, etc. So just remember, though, that the sun's light on your chart is very special because, consider this, there's never been two moments in time when the sun's light has been exactly the same. That's a very kind of phenomenal thing to think about. Every year at a certain date, let's say March 21st, where it's spring equinox, admittedly the sun's light is in the same position, but everything's always changing. Even the molecular structure of the sun is always changing. So it's very, very subtle what I just said, but just to consider, it's just like every blade of grass is different. You know, you go to, wow, it's like just grass. But if you get into that celebration, you get this little miracle principle. That's the main point. But the sun's sign now, you know, we all have a zodiac sign, we'll say, whether you're Aries or Taurus, Gemini, etc., etc. Of course, I always like to remind people, while that's true, saying a good comparison is saying you're Aries, it's like saying you're Canadian. Yeah, it's broad, right? But there is a difference between being a Canadian and being American, isn't there? Now, it's not a question of better, it's only a question of different. We can celebrate as Americans or as Canadians. The same is true, by the way, if you go from BC to Alberta. You ever cross that line and pay attention? Yeah. You're like, what is that what just happened? What just happened, you know? And as people get into BC, they're like, oh my God, I'm back home, you know. Oh yeah. You know why that is? That is not a geographical line that was drawn by some arbitrary force. That's the astrology of British Columbia. Make no mistake. Oh yes, every province has an astrology chart. Every city has an astrology chart. You know the difference when you drive from Penticton to Kelowna? You feel that line? Yeah, that's its astrology. That's true. Now, region, you know, you can talk about longitude and latitude, which is a part of what we ask. You know, okay, somebody calls me for a reading, so I'll ask, okay, what's your birth date, year, place, time, all these, and I'll say time's not necessary, but it does create a sharper picture, but even a fuzzy picture I can see a lot. And I'll use either numerology or the cards, the destiny cards, to back up what I'm seeing in the chart. And yes, that astrology chart shows a great deal, but just staying with the location for a moment. Astrology, sometimes people I have this sense of people poking it with a stick. It's like, this is a kind of an arcane creature. You know, it's like, I don't know, it's a bit superficial, or thinking, yeah, astrology measures the soul. It measures the incarnated soul. That's different. Okay, it doesn't strictly measure the soul. No. What it measures is the incarnated you, the embodied, personality-based, individuated self for this round. That's what it measures. Okay, make sure that. But woven within it, that it even can measure, is the indication. It's another way of describing that there is this soul presence in it all. Soul can be deemed a particle within a great wave, and what we think of the group of souls that we, the humanity of this planet, represent. We're a soul group, and within that soul group there's many groups. And it comes right down to family groups, etc. Okay, and it comes right down to you as an individual. So it's very interesting that you have the concentric circles, and then when you come right down to you, there's no two people alike. So if you're a Pisces, let's say, it's how you embody those archetypes. Ultimately, you as an individual, which is this wonderful little celebration, isn't it? It really is. But then also comes the responsibility of being you. The responsibility of being you is where astrology becomes more serious. It's like, oh, okay, well, we're looking at your chart. By the way, you have these various karmas. And it measures right down to the nitty-gritty in a surprising amount of way that it'll talk about whatever shows up in your chart. I always say, oh, this is what you've inherited. So let's say you're an ego personality, and we talk about your past life. I'll say, oh, actually, it's not your past life, it's your soul's. So I have a little model that goes, I'm here, here's my soul, here's my past life. I go, my soul's previous incarnation left me this. That helps a lot. That helps because the person goes, oh, good, it wasn't me who was a little jerk. But we tend to focus on the negative, but we want to ideally look at the positive. What's the good in this? What's the good in me that I've inherited? Now, admittedly, we can talk about your genetics and your environmental conditioning and everything that you speak English. You're in Canada, you were born into a certain family, your mother and father were certain signs, you have a certain birth order. There's all these factors. Most definitely, they all count. And I've observed every one of them, by the way. And even I've done studies at soul levels. There's infant souls, baby souls, young souls, mature souls, old souls. Yes, we've heard there's old souls. We've heard there's baby souls. So what about in between? Same logic, by the way. Is any soul better than any other? Of course not. That's like saying that baby's more important than that adult or anything like that. It just doesn't work quite like that, but sometimes we lapse into that. So anyway, here we are as souls incarnate, and our astrology illustrates brilliantly how we're embodying, and it shows you the good, the bad, and the ugly. It does. And now, but when we say the bad and the ugly, what we want to do is be aware so that we have more conscious power over it. That's the key. Is when we have more conscious awareness, then we can engage in co-creation. Then we engage in intention. In all of these various tools and healings that we have. Everything from the healing or cleansing ourselves to setting intentions and so forth and so on, right? Now, while we have free will, which is really important, no question, it's amazing how through our life, what choices we make and how we're going about things is subject to what I generally term synchronicity. I didn't make that term up. It's a beautiful term, and it means meaningful coincidence. You know that word coincidence is a little backdoor. Oh, that's just a coincidence. Actually, coincidence means events that coincide. But if there's no meaning in them, then there's no meaning in anything. So the word coincidence is a real cop-out for people who like convenient backdoors on their narrow philosophies. Oh yes, synchronicity means everything has a meaning, a purpose, a rhyme and a reason, a time and a season. That phrase is very significant of what astrology is about. Now, okay, so here we are, souls incarnate. We have this certain body personality, and our astrology, birth date, place, time, describes this sense of who we are, how we are, why we are, and yet you still have free will. With that awareness, you go, oh, I can see who I am, and the goal of an astrologer, in the ideal sense, of course, is to empower you. If the knowledge doesn't empower you, then it's not doing the good job. But it has to, and this is where it gets a little twist, it has to empower you by partially conveying to varying degrees what you came in with so that you can soberly look at it and thereby be conscious and then take responsibility for it. Responsibility doesn't mean this heavy backpack of awareness strictly. It's actually just a nice little leverage of, clarity. You know, it's like, that nursery rhyme, Rumpelstiltskin? When you can name the creature, then you're 51% ahead of it. Now you're in the advantage. So that's one of the most basic aspects of astrology. People will come to me, they'll want, they'll sit there and they'll say, okay, just do it. Just do what you do. And I'm like, well, it's not that simple, actually, because I need to know what you want. There's that aspect. Or I will just do it, and then they'll go away thinking, well, that's not what I wanted. And they sort of, I have this metaphor, it goes like this. People have a sense that going to an astrologer on one hand is like going to a dentist. You get in a chair, you sit there, and they do it. Okay, which is, okay, just do it. You know, what do you want me to do? Tell you? Aren't you the dentist? And that's what they might think of me. But actually, on another level with astrology, is that it caters to so many different things. It's more like going to the restaurant. And there's a menu in front of you that goes, well, what do you want? Okay, so don't underestimate that. So, but if a person doesn't say either, they just say, kind of just do it, then my job is to make sure that, okay, I'm just going to do it, but I'm going to tell you along the way. Okay, so there's a fine line. Just know that with astrology, that if you approach it, it's not a bad idea to have a sense. If you just want the person to do it, they will. Often people have come to me and I say, do you have any questions? They go, no. And by the time I've done the reading, they'll go away, thank you, you answered all my questions. That always feels good. And I go, awesome, you know. And having been doing this for like 20 years, it's challenging sometimes because people sometimes think they know who they are. But there's I always say, you know, there's much more to you than you think. You're more complex. You're more intricate than that. And it's not. I'm not doubting you know yourself in so many ways, but there's maybe other ways that you don't know yourself. So coming back to the sun, coming back to the sun's light now. Everything is very, in the astrology chart, the sun is nothing short of the nucleus of that chart. So for example, when we look at your chart and we see the sun, everything in all the planetary alignments is in juxtaposition to that sun. That's how powerful it is. There could be the basics like the moon phase, were you born during a waxing or a waning moon, for example. There's so much in that alone. Oh yes, there's so much, everything has value. Or you'll see what's on the left of the sun or what's on the right of the sun. There's a whole story of that. So there's all these little technical points, and it goes on and on. But the sun becomes your conscious purpose. It says who you are. The generic aspects, say you're a Pisces or an Aries or a Taurus, that kind of does this sort of overriding sort of summation of your overall intention. But then you can go in with each 30-degree sign, you can get into more precise perspectives on each person through the zodiac. So it gets rather detailed that way. That's where the science of astrology does emerge, the mechanics. It's sort of described on one hand as a science, but on the other hand it's a language. But like mathematics is a language for science, astrology is a language for metaphysics. It's the language of metaphysics. It very significantly incorporates the geometry of shape, meaning circles, spheres, cycles. So there's shape and movement. That's where we get into astronomy. All right, that's the aspect of the technical. But it's very elementary at the level that it's just dealing with basic numbers. Okay, degrees are a bit more complicated, but you get into these basic numbers of, there's only 12 signs. So you get to a place where there's a certain elementary, like earth, air, fire, and water, and then it gets more intricate and they balance each other up. Now, coming back to the sun's light offers, it's a type of, it's like a magic almost, is the word that's kind of a term that can best describe what we're talking about, in that we have this, really the word is relationship. We have this relationship with ourself, our own body, mind, heart, and soul. And that, by extension, is realized through our relationships with others in our life, but also at a more intimate spiritual level. It's a relationship we have with life, a relationship we have with nature. And in a significant sense, when we think of life and nature, in a very cosmic sort of sense, it comes to the sun. I always wonder to myself, I wonder if the whole notion of the Son, Jesus, of God, isn't coming from the sun. See, the ancient pagan religions were very worshipping nature. And you know how the mythology of Jesus is aligned with others? It's called the dying, rising God man. You ever heard that phrase? It's part of the explanation of various cultures. So Jesus dies and rises again. What do you think the sun does at winter solstice? What do you think the sun does every day when the sun sets and rises again? It's a principle of spirituality. So all religions, by the way, are very significantly anchored in the sun. Ultimately, it becomes the light, the sun's light, in a very visceral sense. Is very, very important to understand, okay? So there we are in the sun's light, and it's very important. We go to the grocery store, but if you have to deal with the agriculture and the movement of the animal herds and the way that the plants grow, you're paying attention to the sun. Follow? So in a more ancient sense, they're very reverent. I don't worship the sun. I revere it. Revering the sun means I have great reverence for it. Not just, of course, it's very obvious to say, well, the sun, yeah, of course, you want to have reverence, at one level. But when you get into the deeper understanding that the consciousness that the sun emanates and how we are woven into this sort of reality, we begin to go, wow, that sun plays such a significant role. Now, bringing it full circle, remember, as far as we are concerned on this planet, our experience of the sun is one in a generic sense. There it is, and hopefully we have sunny days, and hopefully it rains too, and all that seasonal weather stuff. But when we get into our astrology, it becomes more intricate yet, more beautiful celebration of how consciousness pervades the entire universe and how our astrology measures that. And then we can think of other, just for a moment, we can think of other suns throughout the universe having a similar kind of expression. And they each are sort of ambassadors to what would be called, at a deep cosmic level, the source light. Okay, we'll leave it on this point, but what that means is the sun has a light, but it is in relationship with the whole universe, and it shares in a certain similarity with all the others throughout the whole universe, okay? So we come back to that. What that kind of tells us is that we, within our soul nature, in our relationship with ourselves and others, are also in relationship with the whole universe. So it takes it, this is, in these statements, you get into the deeper spiritual, cosmic, religious aspects, what would be the science of the religion. With me and all that? So you do just a full tour of the reality of what the sun is as this consciousness, this point of light, which produces a life force, which is significantly intrinsically woven to us. So we can revere it. And if we take it to one more level, just so that let's find out what the metaphysics, we go into what is the consciousness, the mechanics, the science, the intentionality behind the sun. This is a rather important statement. It's rather complicated, but I appreciate it. I'll say it quickly. If the sun has this consciousness and this energy, and it gives life, and we have the solar system, we live on it, what's the rationale, what's the intelligence behind the sun? Well, that's called God, as the old saying goes. But in the manifestation of that, this is what we call goddess. The nature, Mother Nature is well named as Mother Nature because the embodiment of that is goddess energy. Just to say, so it's not a runaway with some dance around the fire goddess cult, which could be wonderful, and I would probably be dancing around the fire too, by the way, make no mistake, as the fervor of the moment drives. But we just understand, what I'm sort of hinting at is that there's a multidimensional reality that we all exist in, and in the deeper sense of astrology, it's helpful to understand, oh my God, this is multidimensional universe, and at the core of it, there's this sort of plan, this God force, this intelligence. So, and it manifests through the sun, which creates solar systems, which have planets, which have life, where we're on it, and our perception, it comes really home this way. Our conscious perception, our beating heart, our chakra system, is totally like a beacon of attunement to it, so it works both ways. We're both the result of it, but in our consciousness we become attuned to it. That is what religion is. That's why astrology is religious. In the sense of not some on your knees worshiping and, sort of not to say there's nothing to see, there's nothing to be said about people's mode of worship. And I don't want to say that anybody shouldn't be on their knees. At a certain level, we almost should be. But at the other end of the scale, when we get into our heart, our chakras, our consciousness, and we realize that we're the result of it, but in our consciousness we attune back to it, and then we live our life in its relative simplicity, it becomes this glory. Our lives become the glory. That's the result. How we live, the quality of our life, that reverence, that regard, that respect, that joy, that's where it all comes full circle. And that's really, in the ultimate sense, what astrology is about. So it provides this map, this message, this communication, this understanding of who you are, why you are, how you are, and even when turning points will come. And we all know we like that sometimes because life gets a bit scary. Because if we lack anything, we start to experience, lack. And so we need to be on top of things. And so what we want to do within all of that understanding of our own astrology is celebrate in a general sense that everybody has it, but it also comes back in a sense to our own individual soul, incarnate, and our astrology will measure that incarnation. And that's the story that I want to tell you today. So thank you so much. So, some final notes. Yes, that's what makes me very passionate about what I do and why I'm very dedicated to it, because I know that society doesn't entirely in the fullness embrace it. So I'm like, if this is not good enough, it must understand. That's who I am. That's how I am. But in the deeper sense of my core, it's like, this works, and nobody's ever going to tell me it doesn't, because I know. And it's a wonderful thing to share. But I'd like to open the floor to any questions, if there's any.
First question I would have is, I know it takes 8 minutes for the sun rays to get from the sun to Earth. What is a light day? How far does it get?
It's just when you say, if you use the 24-hour period, and you say, okay, in 24 hours the light's energy field reaches the fullness of its expanse into space before the cosmic energies of the larger cosmos match it. And it creates, in fact, like a membrane, like a bubble. That's why I would say that the whole solar system is like a cosmic cell. Any other more elementary questions?
Could you give a good definition of incarnate or incarnation?
Yeah, they say that saying information, like information, it's the same thing as that. There's an intelligence, so that we do, of course, come through a body, mother, and that miracle all on its own is sort of its own science. But what we appreciate and celebrate is that that moment of conception, that magical moment based on the man and woman together, which is on one level very primitive, biological, simple, elementary. Anybody can do it, pretty much, right? Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah, no big instructions required. But we do it, and then a baby comes along, and of course eventually is born and takes that breath. So you see, not only the best, simplest way, which is a complicated question, I have to admit, we're incarnate, but so is the entire manifest universe incarnate. Incarnate is another way of saying, because we say carnal, though. It's the carnal root of the word carnate is the flesh, in the flesh, the soul in the flesh. So another way of describing this information, what it suggests is that there's an intelligence behind this. That's the main basic thing I can say.
Do you know anthroposophy?
Yes,
Rudolf Steiner?
certainly.
Because he talks about the incarnation in cycles, right? And the
Yes.
first 7 years is the real grounding incarnation
Yes.
of a child.
Certainly, yes. I know Steiner, and certainly he was a Pisces, by the way. My son, same sun sign. We're born a day apart, it so happens. So yeah, there's a certain frequency of consciousness, certain all of us tap into based on our sun sign and what day we're born, etc. Yes, he certainly was a student of astrology and celebrated the deeper metaphysical story. Yes.
Can we share, I was really interested that you were saying about the sun's core and the nucleus and what's got of ions and minerals and gases and that they're all different. And I just got from the library last week, and I just took it back. It's a massive book. It's this big, like this big. It's in the oversized, it's just Cosmos.
Oh, yes.
And it's the most comprehensive pictures, all full color, of all the planets, all the universes, galaxies, nebula, black holes, you name it, is in full color, that everything's been able to be seen so far. It's amazing. It sure puts you in perspective.
Yes.
And it's interesting. It shows there, measurable by new satellites now, the different nuclei of what the composition of each of the suns are. So you can go in there and see, and they're all really, really different.
Yes.
Really different.
Yes, every sun.
Yeah, and there's some amazing pictures of the planet Sun. Amazing. Where you can see the solar, where they've got right up and you can see all the flares. And if you want to be inspired, get that book, Cosmos. Oh, it blew me away. It blew me away. But the interesting thing is, I have to tell you, I'm so thrilled with it, because I'm a metaphysician, as you know. When we get to the very end of the book, it starts talking about what they haven't been able to measure or see yet, which is going into the dark matter, although they know that there's no such thing as a gap or a void in the whole cosmos. It's filled with matter. So what's this stuff? You know? And they kind of allude at the very end of the book, and I was like, yay! You know? That maybe it is a universal intelligence that could be God in nature. Oh, I was just cultivating. I agree.
Beautiful.
And I thought, they're getting it.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah.
You know, there's a beautiful subject called biocentrism. That word, check that out. You'll get more on that. In my upcoming newsletters, I'll be putting little video clips of that biocentrism, which is very much that celebration. So please sign up for my newsletter at the back room if you're not already. And I have a horoscope on the website you can read as well on a weekly basis. And I put a tip of the week all the time. On a final note on that is the astronomy of astrology is very beautiful, very magnificent, very wondrous. And we get into that, wow. Astrology takes that astronomy, brings it down to like a map, like mandala, and measures the archetypal aspect of it, which ultimately, and I want to leave you on this final note, works largely because that God consciousness is manifesting in us. That in the final analysis is the key understanding. We're not simply in it, it's in us. And we're not just talking about the elemental aspect of nature, we're talking about the consciousness of nature. And that's how astrology works. Thank you so much.
I'm always enthralled when Michael speaks. Thank you, Michael. You brought up a lot of good points. I don't even know how to summarize all that. So I'll leave it with, there's a lot to think about. The fact that we are living within a multi-dimensional reality. I mean, how big and vast is that for us? And how many doors does that really open for us? But also, so imagine, as you were saying, we are living within the sun. We are always nourished by the sun's energy as we follow our life paths that have also been imprinted by the sun. So take the time to breathe that in, if it is true for you, as we pass along the goals.